sure you agree that diminished seventh chords are a massive pain in the behind, and it's often hard to know what to do through them. And I think, to be honest with you, part of that is historical, because I think people learn jazz starting with bebop now, and beboppers weren't huge fans of diminished seventh chords. They tended to like to replace them with various types of 2/5s. I don't really have time to go into that in this lesson, but if you look at a very good example would be a tune like Stella by Starlight, which used to start on a diminished chord. Maybe how you look at it is either E diminished seventh, or Peter Bernstein thinks of it as a D flat diminished seventh with an A and a treble. That chord is now been replaced usually with an E minor 7 flat 5, A 7 flat 9. Okay, so that's probably the most celebrated example of a diminished chord being replaced with a 2/5, but obviously, as all beboppers are obsessed with 2/5s, and that became very much the sound of the harmony going to the 60s, the diminished seventh chord was kind of forgotten. So diminished sevenths on the whole have two main functions. There's leading tone diminished, which can be swapped out for basically 5/1s. So for instance, if I'm in the key of G and I go to an A, I go to a G sharp diminished seventh, and then I go up to an A minor seventh, you can view that very much as being like a 1/6/2, so I can view that as being an E7 flat 9 going to A minor, because that chord is that chord, and just put an E in the bass, and Bob's your uncle, there you go. So you can play it as a 5/1, which is a lot more of a, you don't have to use the diminished arpeggio or something there. Got other options, right? Well, there's anything wrong with just playing the arpeggio, but it is kind of an old school sort of gypsy jazz kind of bebop, early bebop kind of sound. Okay, so that's the well-behaved type of diminished chord. Now, I've generally isolated two what I think of as badly behaved diminished chords that don't behave in that way, and these I think of as bridging diminished, because they don't resolve like a neat sort of dominant chord. So for instance, the big one, if you're in the key of G, B1 is a flat 3, which is in this key B flat diminished seventh, and this can obviously resolve upwards in a well-behaved way to B minor, which could be a substitute for G major, so it could resolve to G/B, which is fine if you just play the B minor on the G, you can get away with that. Thinking of that as a kind of I suppose in that case that would be like an F sharp 7 flat 9 chord goes with that one. To me, actually, they sound very different, but you can treat them that way. Okay, so, but however, it can also go down, which is exactly what it does in Stella by Starlight, but also Embraceable You, right? Just take two common standards. So that doesn't resolve in the usual way, and that can confuse people. It's like, oh, how can it resolve down by half step? Other tunes that are common in the repertoire, Night and Day, Pennies from Heaven, things like that, right? How Insensitive has an example as well, which is slightly different, but kind of the same sort of thing, really. So yeah, that's kind of confusing. The flat 3 diminished. That's a difficult one for many people to get their head around. So that's what I think of as a swing diminished, actually. So it's always like and it's a really if I just play like go from G/B. That's what I think of as the bassy intro, right? So that's me just going from G/B, B flat diminished seventh, A minor 7, B flat diminished seventh, and then back to G/B, right? So it's backwards and forwards. Because of that, I think of it as looking two ways, unlike the other ones, which are all fiercely directional. They all want to go up. The flat 3 diminished seventh has a desire to go either up or down, and it's extremely what we might call parsimonious voice leading. Okay, Barry Harris points this out. If I get a G6 with a B in the bass here, I just make two notes of it flat, so that's the B and the D, B flat and D flat, you get the B flat diminished seventh. Make them flat again, boom down by a semitone again. You get obviously A and C, so that gives you the A minor seventh. And then back. It's a very neat motion like that, and I think of it as bridging motion rather than what we might call cadential motion when you get a dominant chord going to a tonic chord, a 5-1. So that's one thing, okay, and then the other thing is a very related chord, which is of course the, in this key, C sharp diminished seventh, which is the sharp 4 diminished, and that normally goes back to G. Think of like the B section of Lady Be Good, if you're a gypsy jazzer, or maybe bar 6 of a blues. Now you can hear right away that has a very Dixieland sound to it. So if the other one is like the swing chord progression, this is the Dixieland chord progression. So it's kind of possible to see why they might have fallen out of fashion a bit in the 1950s and got replaced with various other kinds of progressions. So however, there are still many tunes which have these chords in, and while you can kind of get away with, you know, maybe just like playing, you know, a 2-5-1 or something through them, tunes like Embraceable You and Stella by Starlight, How Insensitive, seem to demand a different approach because the chords in those songs stick around for a while, so it'd be nice to evoke those colours. And this is a very, very simple approach which I think works extremely well. And if we go back to our Stella by Starlight chord, which is this, now gypsy jazzers would call this in fact a C13 flat 9, even though it has a D flat in the bass. You know, which is kind of like this. So this chord actually has a triad in. That triad is A major. So if we just play A major on the first chord of Stella by Starlight, yeah, that's really cool, I think. So let me do that again. So listen to that. Okay, so that chord is kind of a bit more interesting and intriguing sounding without being an obvious 2-5-1 sort of thing. And if we do it in Embraceable You, if I play the first chord, so I'm playing like in the first chord I might play a G major thing. Some kind of minor 2-5-1 thing. So I mean, I'm using that 13 flat 9 sound again for that chord, which is rather nice. So it's a good sound to get into if you want to sound a bit more kind of like whoa. Now that's all very well, but there's something else we can do to even enhance the colour of it a bit, and this is something I've got from Jordan Clemens. So for instance, we take this. This is the key of G, so actually the second chord, B flat diminished, we'd be using an F sharp triad, F sharp major. We can add a G to it. And that gives us like kind of that diminished quality without giving us too much of that diminished 70s sort of sound, which can sound a bit overbearing and a bit, you know, silent movie. Villain ties the love interest to the rail tracks and the train's coming, that kind of sound, you know. Which is kind of hip when, you know, Verdi did it, but a bit of water's been under the bridge since then. So, like, that is something that you might want to get away from a little bit, unless we're, you know, desperately, you know, trying to get the gypsy jazz sound or whatever. And I think even for gypsy jazz, actually, I really like this sound. So it's a hip way of playing that, you know. And by the way, the G in the F sharp triad, so the flat 9 if you like, Jordan views that as being a tension note. So, you know, the A is the F sharp major is the main sound against the B flat diminished. Let me just demonstrate how that works on How Insensitive. So we're going to change key now to B flat. So first chord is going to be a D minor sort of sound. Second chord is going to be, usually it's C sharp diminished 7th, but we're just going to play an A, right? With that flat 9, so the B flat. And that chord there, which is usually played as a G7/B, we can do the same trick with that. Although perhaps we might want to not use the flat 9 there, might use an ordinary 9. And then we resolve to, in this interesting way, to B flat major, right? So it's quite weird. I'm just going to show you how that works. G now. So you can see that's a very strong pattern. D minor, A with a flat 9, C minor, G with a regular 9th, and then B flat. Interesting, huh? So let me just demonstrate how this might work on a blues. So for instance, if I'm playing like the B flat blues, I go B flat, and then we get, that sounds very cool, I think, as a substitute for the F sharp. Here we go. And hear what a striking sound it is. So it's kind of quite a pungent way of doing it. So I hope you find that useful. It really is. I mean, the other main way you can deal with that chord is just to play the blues scale. And that sounds great because actually the blues scale, so remember to actually play the blues scale, actually contains many of the most important notes of the chords, such as that one and this one. Well, I've been part of the reason why Charlie Parker liked it so much in that place in the blues, or anything else for that matter, including things like confirmation. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you find it useful. Let me know what you think below. Bye.